Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged and delighted to welcome Chief Marshal Arup Raha to our show. Chief Marshal Raha, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ashutosh.
Chief Marshal Raha was the Chief of Air Staff of India from 2014 to 2016. He was the chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee also in 2014 to 2016. He has been honored and recognized by the President of India with a Param Vishisht Seva Medal and Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, as well as with a Vishisht Seva Medal. So, sir, let's first talk about your journey. From a young airman to the Chief of Air Staff, what did you do right to take you right to the top?
Okay. Thank you. I think you're seeking a lot of answers from this simple question. I'll try and put it briefly.
Yes, sir.
I think for every professional, every individual to do well in one's career or profession, one has to have somebody to inspire that individual, inspiration.
Correct.
And for me, I think my inspiration initially was from my father. Mm-hmm. He only convinced me and encouraged me to join the armed forces as an officer. Mm-hmm. So my inspiration was from my father, who was a doctor, basically. And when he passed out from the Calcutta Medical College in the early 1940s, mm-hmm. the Second World War was raging. Mm-hmm. And it has reached the borders, eastern borders of India, right. Burma border then. Mm-hmm. And he immediately volunteered to join the army to serve the injured soldiers and the battle casualties. Mm-hmm. He left after a year or so when the war came to an end, and he started his own practice. Mm-hmm. But he wanted, deep down in his heart, he wanted at least one of his 5 sons to become an officer in the Indian Armed Forces. Mm-hmm. So that mantle fell on me. But mantle falling on me is okay. Mm-hmm. But I think what you require is also passion. I think I was quite passionate to be an officer in the Indian Armed Forces, especially a fighter pilot. Okay, which is very, very adventurous and very romantic, I would say. So both passion and inspiration are the 2 factors. And working hard is very important, and for which I had the capacity to my mind. I could work very long hours and very hard. And I realized after joining the Air Force, that there is no substitute for hard work. You may be talented, but unless you work hard, you cannot make good progress in your career. So I worked very hard. I completed all the important training courses, became an instructor of the highest category. Mm-hmm. I became a combat leader of the highest category. Mm-hmm. I could do instructional tenures in many places. I increased my employability in the Air Force, and making myself, almost kind of not indispensable, but important. And third point, I think, is, reputation as a professional. I worked very hard, and this reputation is based on how you perform in your profession. Like I managed to do well in most of the courses and excel in them. And also, I took challenges as it came in the stride. I never complained or cribbed about any posting. Wherever the Air Force sent me, I loved it, and I went there with an open mind to do well, well and prove myself and convert the challenge into an opportunity. And I think that kind of attitude, I think any successful person will have, to my mind. So the place is as good as the people. That is what I followed. And place may be bad in terms of weather, infrastructure, and other things. But what we can change as a leader and as an officer is that work on the human relations. Human relations, human resources provide a very good quality of life and environment for people to work and succeed. And that is one area I worked very hard, including my wife. We provided a very good environment socially, increasing the bonding. So place did not matter. The type of life that you led, that mattered. And that is, I think, how I led my people wherever I went. And the last factor to my mind is that luck. Luck and destiny are important in life, whether you're good or bad, to succeed. And in the Air Force, in the armed forces, it's like a pyramid. The base is very broad. The promotional prospects are very, very grim as you go up. It is 1:10, 1:5, 1:3, and things like that. So whenever I was in a panel for promotion, I used to tell my wife, who didn't know much about the Air Force because I didn't tell her much, that, well, everybody in this panel is very good. So if I don't make it, we should not feel bad because somebody equally good or better has made it. So if I got my promotion, I told her it was a bonus. And I fortunately lived on the bonus for the next 4 or 5 promotions. So these are the few things I think.
Well, so I think you're being very, very modest. But let me ask you my next questions. And this is for the hundreds and thousands of people who will listen to our conversation, including, and there'll be a lot of young soldiers and young managers and young individuals. Having led such a large force, and also being the chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee, what would you say was your leadership style?
Right. Well, in the armed forces, the public perception of the armed forces leadership is very simple, that you give orders, you are stiff, and you are rigid, and you only believe in giving orders and making sure everybody obeys those orders.
Yeah.
But I don't think I fit into that stereotype because, as I said, I was very interested in human relations. Working in the human resources is the biggest asset for any leader. One would be successful if he can manage the human resources well. Other parameters in terms of infrastructure, in terms of equipment, are secondary. They're important, but everything depends on how you exploit the manpower, how you make them able. So that is where I worked, and therefore I realized there is a need to build very good congenial environment by being friendly to people. While you would be a disciplinarian, you'd be strict, but you'll have a soft approach to get things going. So that was my style of functioning to my mind, and I think people saw the example that is to set more than anything else. So that was my leadership style to my mind. I consulted everyone because I found that making a decision, a good decision would depend on how much inputs one would get as the leader. So more I sought inputs, better it was. And the more strong was the, I think, decision-making process. And if I did not let them speak before I made my mind clear, people would normally hesitate to counter the arguments of the leader. So it's better to give the opportunity to be honest with the opinions before we decide.
Very well said. So now let's move to the Air Force, sir, and technology. You've been a fighter pilot. How have you seen technology change in the Air Force and the defense services over the last 3.5, 4 decades that you've been a part of it?
You see, armed forces, equipment, weapon platforms, etc., are very technology intensive. And it is state-of-the-art technology, especially for the Air Force.
Correct.
The cutting-edge technologies are being used in the weapon systems and the equipment that you use for war fighting. So we are so dependent on technology, and the technology changes so rapidly. The biggest problem in the armed forces, especially with the military aviation side, the Air Forces, is how do you manage obsolescence? It is a huge challenge, and leadership is always in trouble, I would say, in trying to work out means and methods to remain abreast of the technology, because each equipment that you buy is so expensive. Say, fighter aircraft is close to 1,000 crores, and it uses the latest technology, but its life is about 3 decades. But within the first decade itself, you find that the technologies have already gone past the ones we have. And therefore, we are becoming redundant and obsolete. So you have to do a midlife upgrade of that equipment, that weapon platform, halfway through its life. Otherwise, it will lose its operational relevance and capability to fight the later generations of weapon systems. So that is the biggest challenge. What are the areas of military technologies? So it is metallurgy. It will be propulsion systems, like engines, etc. Would give you thrust to drive a vehicle or a ship or an aircraft, etc., or fly an aircraft. Then you will require technologies like cyber, artificial intelligence, space, rocket, electronic warfare, avionics, and of course, IT and other related issues. The cyber is very important. Artificial intelligence is very important, the latest ones. So all these areas, the military technologies have to be developed, or you have to buy from outside. So that is how we make sure that we are abreast of the latest technologies, and our weapon systems and warfighting capability is modern all the time. But remember, that in war fighting, the technologies that the military uses is all dual use technology. That is the good thing about it. If a nation does not realize it, then we are in trouble. And in fact, our predecessors at the time of our independence were very far-sighted, and they opened up 41 laboratories from the DRDO, Defense Research Development Organization, who would actually do research and develop critical technologies required by the armed forces. And the DPSUs, Defense Public Sector Undertakings, to take on the task of converting these technologies developed by DRDO laboratories into goods and weapon systems and equipment for the use of the armed forces. But unfortunately, these two entities did not live up to the expectation of the nation. So we are still buying a lot of high-tech, state-of-the-art weapons from abroad. But that is actually very sad for us. So what we need is that we must develop our own technologies and we must work very hard towards it. Otherwise, we'll miss the bus in terms of...
So, from an air perspective, I want to go above the air and go to space. The US has recently set up, President Trump set up, a space force, so to speak.
Yes.
India has been talking about space. I'd like to get your perspective. Why is the defense of space so important? And after that, I'll come to cyberspace.
Right. Okay. The latest domains of warfare is going to be space and cyberspace, as you're mentioning.
Yes, sir.
And these two domains are silent warfare domains.
Okay.
You don't have to fire a bullet. You don't have to get into bloodbath and, war fighting truly. But you'll use these technologies in space and in cyberspace to overwhelm the adversary.
Okay.
So that is the importance. So space, you see, space will give you a lot of capability. Intelligence, gathering, surveillance, reconnaissance, targeting, navigation, so many things. There's a lot of things that you can do, and communications as well. So everything that you require in modern day life, day-to-day life, civil life, as well as the military aspects of military domain is through the space as of now. And even cyber is actually dependent on a lot of space assets, space-based assets, satellites being sent, communication satellites being sent, electro-optic, infrared, and synthetic aperture radars are being launched into the space, who will monitor everything all the time for one's okay. So that is the importance of space. Therefore, I think Indian armed forces are trying to develop capability, space-based assets in terms of capability to launch number of satellites, microsatellites, put them into various types of orbit and monitor, get intelligence and surveillance, reconnaissance, targeting, communications, everything. So that is why it is important. I think we have done reasonably well, but we need to do much more. We are actually lagging a little. We require much more thrust in this area.
And so your perspective on cyberspace, I mean, what happened to the Bombay electricity grid, or we keep hearing that our neighbor, and we'll talk about our neighbor in a few minutes, keeps trying to, break into the army headquarters, the Air Force headquarters.
Yes.
What are we doing to protect ourselves against such cyber attacks?
Yes, as I said, that cyber warfare is the immediate domain of concern. Unless we prepare ourselves, not only as the armed forces, but as a nation, for your economic survivability and growth, your financial aspects, your power sector, your communication sector, your transportation sector, everything is digital. So therefore, cyberspace has become extremely important to be protected. So the government and the nation must have both defensive capability in cyberspace as well as offensive capability, because an adversary, if it is going to be offensive with you, we need to pay them back in the same coin. So therefore, you have to develop those capabilities. And you don't require a very large force of human beings, men and women, or with technical brains and capability. You require a few people who are actually specialists, who have passion for such the cyber warfare, and they work very hard, dedicated manner, and they can do wonders for you. And that is where I think the nation has to have a good policy. And the nation has a policy already. They're working on it, both offensive and defensive aspects. So I cannot give you any more information on it.
Absolutely.
But definitely, India as a nation is going ahead. And in fact, the armed forces has also set up the cyber command. It is not a command, but actually it should be a command to my mind. If you look at the developed nations like the US and the Russians, the Chinese, they have the cyber commands, with a lot of equipment, a lot of gadgetries, lot of highly developed technological innovations, and people who are especially trained for it. And the armed forces have already set it up. I think the civil sector has set it up, but the vulnerability still remains unless we spend more time in research and development and building our counters.
Fascinating. So, sir, I'm going to move on to another segment. It's often said that you cannot choose your neighbors. We have two tough neighbors. I won't call them enemies, but you have two tough neighbors, China and Pakistan. I'd like to first talk about China to you. Given the recent kind of aggressiveness from Xi Jinping, and I've been to China about 70 or 80 times in the last 25 years. What, in your opinion, are some of the challenges China represents for us?
Well, we all know that the latest challenge to the entire world is China. It is not a challenge only for its immediate neighbor, India, but it's a challenge for the entire world. Its meteoric rise, in all spheres of activities, especially the economy, flushed with funds, infrastructure, and a capability to do R&D and produce results. And now it has become the global hub of manufacturing, aided by the globalization plan, which was given easily by the US and the European Union and the developed nations. And now after the Wuhan virus pandemic, we realize that how the world is vulnerable, the Chinese methodology of working, and how they have actually captured the entire world's market. And now they've become very, very belligerent, aggressive, and a new competition has started, with the US in terms of superpower rival.
Correct.
Yes, that's fine. Rivalry will always be there. But if China becomes another hegemonic power like others in the past, including the US, I think the world will face a lot of difficulties, which is not acceptable in this currently, interconnected world, globalized world, to my mind. So that is the main problem area. The belligerence is not is actually doesn't go with the latest development in the world. Secondly, its revisionist policy, supremacy of the Middle Kingdom attitude, national narrative is really throwing up big challenges. It is to the entire world in terms of security. See the way it's behaving in East China Sea, South China Sea, not adhering to any rules, regulations, international laws, the way it is behaving along the LSE in the Himalayan borders. Obviously, it is upsetting the whole world. So China is a challenge for everybody, and especially when this nuclear neighbor is adversarial to us and is working collusively with another adversary in the Western borders, to pin down India, keep it engaged in such a manner that it's stymie the progress of India economically or otherwise, to be a developed nation fully, to be a regional power and a pole in Asia. So that is the way the China is working. Chinese are working against us. So India has to actually transform its policy from one China policy. I think we need to ask for reciprocation of one India policy, which we have not been doing. We have been conceding too many things to the Chinese. It's time we stand up, especially after the Galwan Valley skirmish. And they have bared their teeth, and it is very, very clear that they are building an infrastructure for India to tackle India in the northern borders, which is very, very difficult borders because it's an altitude, the Himalayan borders, you have the highest airfield there, dialogue with Oldie, we have the highest battlefield there, Siachen Glacier, and it has to be maintained by air most of the time. So we have to build very rapidly the infrastructure in the border areas.
Very interesting.
We have, but we had not given enough importance because we thought that we don't want to annoy the Chinese. But what is there to annoy the Chinese?
Absolutely.
Because they're already sitting on our head in terms. They have become a real bully. So we have to take the bully by the horn, otherwise we'll be in trouble.
Absolutely.
So that is one thing, and we must build up our total capability, comprehensive national power. That is military power as well as economic power. We have to work very hard. 30 years back, 3 decades back, India and China were at par in terms of economic development, is GDP, etc., etc. But in 30 years' time, through that authoritarian rule of the Chinese Communist Party, they have transcended. They have transformed itself, and they are far ahead of India. So what we need is that we are also capable. I'm sure in 30 years' time we'll also do well as the Chinese have done. But what you need to do is that match weapon for weapon, not in terms of numbers. Numerically, we cannot match them, but definitely in terms of capability or technology, we should be ahead of them. In fact, in most of the technologies in the weapons domain, warfighting domain, we are better than them.
Wonderful.
So that is going to definitely help us in deterring China and making sure that if there is a skirmish, we win the skirmish like we won the one at Galwan. So that is my take on the Chinese.
Fascinating. And I'll come back. I want to move to Pakistan, sir, and then I'll come back to both Pakistan and China towards the end of our conversation.
Right.
I'd love to get your perspective on Pakistan, which I have written about also. Pakistan is a nation in turmoil. And of course, nobody knows who runs Pakistan, etc. But what are your thoughts on handling the neighbor on our West?
Yes. Pakistan will remain a thorn in our flesh because, in many areas they have lost out because of their own misdeeds. They brought in misfortune for that nation. Bangladesh was created because the policies that the West Pakistan military and the political parties followed was devastating. They cannot blame India for the birth of Bangladesh. Okay, so they want to seek revenge. Therefore, this mindless revenge will continue for some time, for a few more decades, maybe 1 or 2 more generations. But things will change definitely. But as of now, they are being supported collusively by our northern or eastern neighbor to stymie the growth of India, as I mentioned. So it will remain a thorn, and we have to tackle them with strength, to my mind. For every instigation or sponsoring terrorism by the state of Pakistan against India, we must reciprocate boldly. Even if it escalates into a higher level of conflict, we have to accept that. Otherwise, once again, we will be losing out this battle. And after what happened in Afghanistan, I think, there is a huge wind blowing into the sails of fundamentalist forces, terrorist forces, terrorist organizations, and radicalization is going to take place. This victory is being considered that way. So as a result of which, many terrorist organizations, which actually are nurtured in Afghanistan with Pakistani help, and Pakistan is going to sponsor terrorism against India. Okay, so we have to increase or strengthen our anti-terror, anti-fundamentalist greed, intelligence network, etc., so that we can tackle this upsurge that is going to take place in terrorist activities. And we all know, you mentioned that Pakistan, nobody knows who is controlling. No, to my mind, is very, very clear. Okay. Pakistan is a very, very special nation.
Right.
Very special nation because the army there has a nation to itself. The army has ruled there for almost half the time it has been independence in 1947 through military coup and junta ruling with authoritarian approach. And the rest of the time, in its lifespan of that nation, it has been playing from behind the back, from behind the curtain. It actually controls everything. Which political party will win the elections, actually a sham elections or a democratic process, and who will become the prime minister is a selected, elected prime minister. Absolutely. With the army. So army has a total say in the foreign policy, in the nuclear policy, who is going to be the prime minister, which party will win. So it is very sad state of affairs. Unfortunately, it is being supported by the US as well as China. There are not many countries in this world who get support from two poles of part of nations who are fighting among themselves as superpower. So, in Afghanistan, the US lost to the Taliban only because of the support, direct and indirect support of the Pakistani forces to the Taliban. And this is very clear. Everybody knows, even the Americans know, but unfortunately, they have done nothing about it. And they'll continue to lose in this subcontinent, in this region, in their policies, unless they tackle Pakistan. That is very clear in my mind. But unfortunately, they don't think so. So let them suffer.
And a question for you on Afghanistan also, sir. Yeah. What is your view on the events that are unfolding there? I mean, everything happened so quickly. In 20 days, the entire regime had changed. What do you think is the impact of Afghanistan on our country?
Yeah, as I said that, Afghanistan, the loss of face and running away from that war by the US and the allied forces is going to actually give rise to further radicalization because they think they have won the war against Western power. And then obviously we are going to face a lot of problems in terms of terrorist activities. Not only us, everybody around the world, Europe, even the neighbors, Central Asian republics, Russia, China, everywhere, Iran. So that is the first impact. But let me also talk to you about that why the Americans failed in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, we all know, is a graveyard of empires. Absolutely. The Americans did not take lessons from that, on the historical past of Afghanistan. Any empire which has gone in there to take strategic control and control the lives of those people have actually lost out to the warlords and their fighters. And they are doomed. They all ran away from there like the Americans have. So I think the US should have learned the right lessons from it. US thinks that they can use, military power to win conflicts. Yes, you will win the conflict with military power. But at the end of the war, since you have not won the hearts and minds of the people, you have lost the actual war. Okay, and the conflict you'll not be able to control. Like it is lost. It has not won any war after the Second World War, the US. So their policies are all wrong, if you ask me. So they didn't realize that they have to win the hearts and minds of the Afghan people, which they didn't do. So after 20 years of investment in a lot of funds, trillions of dollars, a loss of lives from their side and the allied forces, the Afghans lost so many lives. It has come back to zero where it started. Okay. So the US policy itself has been wrong. And I think India's policy was very right. You try and serve the people, create infrastructure, humanitarian aid, colleges, schools, medical facilities, healthcare facilities, infrastructure for development, roads, transportation, etc. So that is the right approach to my mind. So America, after having invested so much, have lost out the war. And it is going to be bad for the world because, Afghanistan is a country where I don't think the Western values can be imposed because they lead a life, a tribal life, the culture is tribal, and let them evolve themselves. If they want to adopt Western values, etc., it will automatically happen. But if you enforce it and push it down their throats, it is not going to work. And that is the lesson. And those nations who are trying to actually exploit the situation in Afghanistan, be it Pakistan, be it China, be it Russia, they are going to suffer more in the near future. That is my estimation.
What a great response. What a great response. So I've got time for two more quick questions, sir. And I'm going to come back again to our soldiers. It has often been said that a Chinese soldier fights for his party, a Pakistani soldier fights for his religion, and an Indian soldier, and when I say soldier, I include airmen and the naval people as well.
Yeah,
they fight for their motherland. I'd love to get your perspective on these three different.
Right. I think what you mentioned, Mr. Garg, that more or less true. but I'll explain a little more on these issues that you have highlighted. Is a PLA, People's Liberation Army, actually belongs to the Communist Party of China.
Correct.
It is not the part, PLA or the army of the Chinese people. Right. It belongs to a party. Can you imagine? If we have 10 parties in India and each had their armies, what sort of democracy you would have? There'd be anarchy. So in China, the Communist Party of China, CCP or CPC, usurped power through a revolution, bloodbath, killing millions of people under the leadership of then Mao, communist leader, during the Cultural Liberation, etc. And the PLA was instrumental in this. So they have brutalized the society and the country to such an extent, and they think that only way to deal with the nation and the people and get the allegiance is to use force. So that is, it's become a tool of oppression. And since it belongs to a party, it actually doesn't represent the nation. Secondly, it's trying to perpetuate the rule of the communists there, CCP, through the PLA. And PLA is a conscripted army. Its morale is very low, especially with one-child policy. The PLA, nobody wants to join the armed forces. There is no incentive. And who wants to lead a harsh life? So the morale is low, the leadership is poor, very corrupt. You read it in the media, etc. And then it's a tool of oppression. So that is the speciality of PLA. Now the Pak army, as I mentioned, one army which is a nation to itself. And despite having lost all the wars it has fought, since its inception, Pakistan army continues to rule that nation. I just gave you the explanation to it.
Yes, sir.
So it's very strange that they lost face, and they lost in Bangladesh in 1971, and the biggest surrender in a war after the Second World War was the 1971 Indo-Pak conflict, surrender of 93,000 more troops, prisoners of war of Pakistan to Indian forces. So that's actually a very big chapter and shameful chapter on the army, which is actually still ruling that country. So that is that is the contradictory thing. But as far as the Indian forces are concerned, we all know that it is apolitical. It serves the constitution. It doesn't serve any political party. And it is actually the fourth pillar of Indian democracy, republic, and the constitution.
Absolutely.
Besides the executive, legislature, and the judiciary. We normally think the media and the press is the fourth pillar of our democracy and republic. But unfortunately, I think we have lost faith in the media and press, etc., because they have become actually tools in the hands of various political parties, etc. They are compromised and they have been manipulated. So they really do not bring out the true news, or they do not have the guts to print the correct information. So they are trying to play for some party or some vested interest or the other, which as a result they have lost this prestige. And Indian armed forces, to my mind, is a symbol of national integration, a defender of secularism and sacrifice. They are ready to sacrifice their lives for the nation. It is not religion. When somebody fights for the nation, he's an Indian. When somebody fighting dies for the nation, he's an Indian. He's not a Muslim, Hindu, Sikh. So that is the difference as far as the Indian army is concerned.
That's such an amazing response. And my last question to you, sir, and I'm going to ask you to wear your Air Chief Marshal hat and tell me, what do you see as the war of the future?
The war of the future, I think, is going to be, as I mentioned, in the economic domain, okay, in the cyber domain, space domain, using the latest technologies in communication, artificial intelligence. So you'll have to overwhelm the adversary or counter the adversary or deter the adversary so that our capabilities are not hampered. So space is one, cyber is another, and economic capability. So that we should be able to face up with the sanctions, especially in this world of I would say, globalization, interdependence, we would have a lot of cards to play, a lot of strengths to play to be in the rightful place. And that is going to be the nature of warfare in the future. So we have to invest a lot in these technologies, remaining abreast of the technologies. And Atmanirbhar, in that, we have to make sure that we develop the latest technologies to the fullest extent. India missed the first industrial revolution in the 18th, 19th century because we are being ruled by foreigners.
Correct.
We missed out on the second industrial revolution, which happened during the intervening period, First and Second World War, and then post-Cold War, the Cold War season. But we did not participate in research and development of technologies for military. Instead, we only supplied raw materials and manpower.
Right.
We had only a few ordnance factories to produce some amount of military ordnance and equipment. But that was nothing compared to what we should have done. So we never built up our industrial base and technologies. And if we concentrate on the few aspects I've mentioned, the cyber, space, artificial intelligence, communications, etc., then I think we'll be one of the leading countries. And I think we have a very strong base in terms of skills and professionals. And we need to just, state of the nation approach that everywhere is all must be combined to achieve the goals that they have set. So that is my opinion about how we can actually meet the challenges of a future war.
Fascinating. Chief Marshal Raha, I'm so grateful you have spoken to me. Thank you for such an amazing conversation. Thank you for your incredible perspectives from the time you started as a young airman or young cadet, talking of technology, talking of China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, our soldiers. I'm so grateful. Thank you again, sir, and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Ashutosh, for giving me this opportunity to speak with you on this podcast. All the best to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.